hearty welcome to Daily Comparative platform. I think Sri will explain and introduce the DC a bit and also introduce you. This is our third lecture from the subgroup which is dealing with memory studies and diaspora is organizing. Apart from that, we have other groups which have been organizing various lectures and webinars. Though till now we have been focusing primarily on comparative literature, comparative culture studies, specific lectures. I think from the title of your lecture, it will provide a sort of a theoretical understanding and also background for those who are trying to initiate themselves not only in dialogism but also in multidisciplinary approach in comparative literature. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Welcome. So now I am passing it to Shrimoyee Chattopadhyay to introduce the speaker and daily comparatist.
Thank you, Amitava, for the welcome note. So I'm just going to brief about Delhi Comparatist so that it won't take much time. Delhi Comparatist is an academic group which was initiated by the teachers and students of the University of Delhi. And the primary aim of the group is to study the Indian literary through the prism of transmediality and interdisciplinarity. And the primary focus of this group is to develop a critical understanding of the political and the social dynamics of multicultural Indian literary scenario. We have organized several research like seminars and workshops and conferences. And through this, we have embraced several topics like comparative studies, digital humanities, spatiality, literary historiography, among others. The primary intention is to engage with the different methodology, theory, and approaches which all pertain to this interdisciplinary group of studies. Among the various subgroups, as Amitava said, one of them is working on diaspora and memory studies. And by organizing these seminars, we always try to have a dialogue between these different groups. We engage scholars who are grounded in multidisciplinary groups of study. And today's session is also conceptualized in the same line. We sincerely hope that the interaction or the feedback that we are going to get after this talk is going to add a new dimension to how comparative studies function today. Now, I would like to welcome our speaker, Dr. Syrrina Haque. Dr. Haque teaches English literature, creative academic writing, and research methodology at University of Lahore, Kinnaird College for Women, Lahore School of Economics, LGSIDP, University of London, and Government College University. Dr. Haque's first book, Sand in the Castle, a collection of short stories, was published in USA in 2010. Her second book, an academic nonfiction, Cultural Confessions in Khaled Hossein's Work, was published in Germany in 2017. Her manuscript, Dialogue on Partition, Literature Knows No Borders, has won Honorable Mention Book Award at NEMLA 51st Convention, Boston. She has held many talks at universities as well as on television and conducted workshops on writing, both academic and creative. She has been writing as a freelance writer for newspapers and magazines. Her research articles have also been published in scholarly journals. Her research paper received the Best Paper Award in Japan. She has won Summer Fellowship Award, USA, and has been teaching at the University at Buffalo as visiting assistant professor. Dr. Haque was placed on the principal's roll of honor list. So now I would like to ask Dr. Syrrina to take the floor. Thank you.
All right. So good afternoon, everyone. For us, it's still afternoon, I'm assuming, because it's 4:35 for us. And for you, probably it's a little bit beyond that. But I'm delighted to have been invited to this forum and this particular talk, which for me is a dialogue in itself. And the possibility, of course, has been generated through this technology of Zoom. Now we can zoom into each other's world across borders. The whole idea was that my book, which is Dialogue on Partition Literature Knows No Borders, should probably be Zoom Knows No Borders. So at this point in time, I'm teaching at a university at Buffalo across the Atlantic, as well as conversing with you here. So this was the whole idea of dialogue. And so my research is basically on dialogism, the theory of dialogism, as well as the possibilities of dialogue through art and literature. And I'll just give you a brief history of why I decided to do that. And that goes back to actually when I was around 12 years of age. I was in grade 8, and I had a British teacher, and she asked, what is the significance of 1857? And I automatically raised my hand and said, War of Independence. And she said, no, it's British mutiny. So more than the fact that she had a different name for this event, the fact that she negated a truth that I had been schooled with for years, you know, the kind of knowledge you are drilled with at school level. So that had been negated altogether. That got me to thinking that truth can be negated. There can be multiple and plural truths out there, and it would not be wise to just close our worlds to a particular truth that we have been exposed to now incorporate multiple perspectives and multiple truths in our frame of reference, which in itself is actually later on I find out that that's why I relate myself to this theory, because this is what M.M. Bakhtin is also talking about, of bringing everyone else's perspective into your frame of reference. So from that day onwards, I decided that I'm going to now look at different angles. So I had enrolled myself in a science program, but then I switched to literature because I felt that I had somehow more spectrum, more space for those perspectives. Especially the genre of novel, which I worked on, has somehow, I felt, more space to incorporate all the perspectives. So I started my research on why literature could and how literature could provide this space. So for me, then the question was, what is literature? For me, I cannot give you a definition of literature, but what I felt was literature to me. To me, then art and literature became something that could take me to an inward journey of not only myself, but of the characters, of the subject, whichever was entertained. So this was the whole crux of my finding, that literature, any piece of art or literature which can take you to that inward journey can be qualified as literature. It does not have to be any piece of epic writing. It does not have to belong to Louvre and at a particular spot in an art gallery. It can be a small drawing, so far as it takes you to that inward journey. So what was that inward journey? I wanted to know that how many journeys have all these artists gone through? How many themes have been explored to this time? Can we actually connect ourselves to the artists that had written centuries ago to today's time? So in doing so, I thought there would be multiple themes. But when I thought about it, when I started actually exploring, I felt that there was only one theme. And I'd like to share the screen here to help you out with that just a little bit. Okay. So that theme for me was, who am I? Now, who am I meant for me was that who is something which is not anything of importance to me. I don't need to know that I am Syrrina. I don't need to know that even that I'm a woman. It's a social construct. Hence, who is a social construct? It's an identity marker. I don't need a passport for myself. I don't need an identity card for myself. This is something that I need to acquire for a society. And then I, which is in the capital, is actually the self. Now that should have been a singular self, but as I explore myself, I find multiple selves within me. And that is the problem, that the multiple selves are in contestation with each other at all times. This is another concept of dialogue that I discovered. The multiple voices that reside within us, they're in constant dialogue with each other. They're in contestation with each other as well as dialogue. So at one point I may be a teacher, the other point I'm also a mother and a daughter. So there will be a contestation at times. For example, I'm sitting here delivering a lecture. So I'm not actually befriending myself as a mother, but I need to befriend all my multiple selves. I need to be in dialogue with my multiple selves. Only then I could reach the process of individuation, which Carl Jung speaks of. So all literature and art, all pieces somehow or the other are speaking of this contestation, and they are speaking of this dialogue which is required between the multiple selves and our identity markers. With that, I come to am, which is an assertive word. But because it has been placed between who and I, identity and self, it becomes problematic. What further problematizes this issue is the question mark, which is actually the most important of all, because that signifies the quest of life. And here I'd like to show, sorry. Let me escape just a bit. I'm sorry about that. So this is the question mark of which is the quest of life. So without the quest of life, this journey is actually meaningless. So the moment I place any full stops and like I say, I am a teacher, I am a mother, what I'm doing is I'm giving an ultimate word. I'm giving a closed reality. So there is no room left for dialogue. The question mark that am I a woman, am I a mother will always enable this dialogue possible. Hence, for dialogue to propagate, questions have to be generated rather than closed ultimate words to be enhanced. With that, of course, I have also come up with this little formula that if I'm going to consider this as who am I? Now, I'll go back to who am I first, just to make you understand the concept, why I'm saying that this is the only theme that has been worked upon since ages. If we, for example, we're all familiar with Greek texts. So if we go back to Greeks, they start their journey. If you look at Oedipus Rex, his quest was who am I? Was it not? If you look at Canterbury Tales, Chaucer's quest was who am I? If you look at Hamlet, Macbeth, Othello, King Lear, then you move to Hardy's Tess, Ibsen's Nora, you move to postmodern man, the existentialist quest of who am I in this world. You look at Hemingway, you look at Virginia Woolf, then you move to post-colonial identity, the displaced identity of where am I and who am I? If I'm here, who am I? So, and then of course, you can also allocate this to art. Pablo Picasso's painting, Weeping Woman. You can allocate it to Monet's The Scream, Mona Lisa. Then, most importantly, the mystic thought that unites almost everyone, whether it's Hindu mysticism or Christian mysticism or Muslim mysticism. You have Bulle Shah asking, Ki jana main kaun? So this thought is very much prevalent in almost all forms of art and literature. And this allows, in itself, there is an inherent quality of dialogue within it. So if we are going to then look at various selves or various notions that we come across, I wanted to see how we are divided. So we are divided mostly by binaries. So I explored this little formula that I made. If you place these binaries on a line, integer line, like black and white here, for example, you think that these are binaries. But if you move black just a little bit from -10 to say -8, it becomes a little whiter. You move white towards say +8 or +7, it becomes a little blacker. So there is an element of white and black and white, which means that there are that many shades of gray that we can indulge in. Just like this time right now is 5 o'clock maybe. So that is that much closer to night, but it also it has the quality of day within it. This is also replicated in monologism and dialogism. There is an element of dialogism in monologism, and there is an element of monologism in dialogism. I will explain further what I believe is monologism. And that is why I delved into art and literature rather than history or political science or anything else to understand dialogue. As a part of the democratic core, I could have also worked on dialogue. But I felt this is the problem. Why art and literature is more dialogic is because history in itself has a singular consciousness. Now, what happens with that is, it is dictated upon by an institution or an organization or a person, one person. It is a singular consciousness. I have spoken to a lot of historians, by the way, and they have said that no, we place questions also. And if you look at the World History A-levels program, you will see those questions in the books too. But at the end of the day, what history demands is, this is it, full stop. And what literature or art demands is this it? This is what I feel defines. And the moment you ask this question, your dialogue begins. Because according to M.M. Bakhtin, dialogue is an utterance. that is a response to an utterance in the past, and that anticipates a response in the future. So what dialogism does is it creates a relationship between past, present, and future. This is the only way forward, because if we continue to dwell in the past utterances and not look to the response, which is to be anticipated in the future, we do not move forward. So as a human also, we are always, now whatever I'm saying is actually a response to an utterance in the past, and whatever I am saying, there will be a response to it in the future. So this is what defines dialogism in that context. So this book of mine, Dialogue on Partition Literature Knows No Border, and this is the graphic image that I used for it, and it was an award-winning photograph, which has a bell from the Hindu temple, and you have Mary, and you have Badshai Mosque. So, and on the right side actually is a Gurudwara, which could not come into the frame. So the coexistence of cultures, of religions, we have already seen that in the subcontinent. It has been there for centuries. But what I'm trying to say is events happen. An event has happened. We have to move forward and look forward rather than dwell in the past. And this entity shows of three things together, shows that it is a possibility that even religious symbols have a possibility of coexisting with each other, and which I will describe further when I speak of the different elements of dialogism. So dialogism, actually, this is just a theoretical reference, but I have actually given a more layman explanation of it. I can do so further. Dialogism denotes the quality of an instance of discourse that explicitly acknowledges that it is defined by its relationship to other instances, both past to which it responds and future whose response it anticipates. For Bakhtin, the individual word or phrase is as dialogic as the work and even the or collection of works. So Bakhtin takes the concept further into language, making all language dynamic, relational, and engaged in a process of endless redescriptions of the world. So what Bakhtin is saying is that we have to find new ways of seeing. When we incorporate your perspective and her perspective and his perspective and my perspective together, perspective of the past, what I'm saying is that history is one voice, one perspective that has to be also incorporated. But as histories rather than just history. I would rather like to incorporate the Hindu perspective, the Sikh perspective, the Christian perspective, the Parsi and my perspective into the frame of reference, which will produce actually a new way of seeing. And this is what a dialogic novel actually has to offer, because novels have multiple characters. Those characters have the capacity to open that dialogue. You can have a Muslim character, you can have two types of Muslim characters, you can have two types of Christian characters, you can have two types of black characters, two types of white characters. So this is the possibility because of the space of the novel. So a dialogic novel encompasses the world into an open-ended, multi-voice dialogical whole, showing many worlds all equally capable of expressing themselves and conceptualizing objects. Bakhtin lays emphasis on the dynamic interplay and interruption of perspectives to produce new ways of seeing. It is incommensurability which gives dialogue its power. So my work has always been on inclusivity with exclusivity, diversive rather than divisive. So when this incommensurability is very important, and we have to celebrate these incommensurable truths. We have to celebrate the differences. Rather than dwell on the differences and use them as divisive forces, we look at them as diversive forces, and we can easily then celebrate them. So the dialogic novel celebrates this incommensurability in ethnicities and religion, as well as enabling a pluralistic and dialogic renegotiation of religious content. So the dialogic novel, as opposed to non-fiction historical work, has a reflecting relation to history that surrounds and produces it. It is an active intervention in the heteroglossia in which it lives and moves. The novel orchestrates all themes, the totality of the world or objects and ideas depicted and expressed in them by means of the social diversity of speech types and by differing individual voices that flourish under such conditions. Now, another concept is of rhizome, which Bakhtin works on. Rhizome is actually, what it means is roots, right? Branching out. So when we talk of art and literature, if we look at it from a point of view that it is universal. So, and we sort of metaphorically, I look at art and literature somewhat like the universal element, which is water. Now, water will always find its way. If the more you try to entrap it, it will seep through. It will find those porous borders Bhava was talking about. So rhizome is actually branching out. So there will be no hierarchy. The water will just flow out. And art and literature then thus flows out. Today in the morning, I saw a picture of a tree from which a spring found its way through the tree. It was spurting out of the tree because it has to come out somehow. No matter how much you ban a writer, no matter how many writers were in exile, they made it and they made their work heard. So this is how art and literature can be heard. And what we in the subcontinent, what I looked at was the imbrigations. If we can find, the subset and subsets we did in mathematics. So the imbrigations are important. They allow dialogue to happen, the shared symbols, which the Parsis, Hindus, and Muslims and Sikhs had. After all, we lived in the same locale. After all, we enjoyed the same food. And even if you read William Dalrymple's novel, White Mughals, you will see the white soldiers were also occupying the same space. So they were wearing shalwar kameezes, they were eating pan, and they were eating the same food as we were because they were in the same locale. So the shared symbols then allow us to have that existence. And for that, I also, for my research, then I went to Nankana Sahib's Gurudwara, and right outside the Gurudwara, I saw this wall. And this was the epitome of dialogue to me, the eclectic God that we all refer to in the novels that I had chosen for my research. And Jaswant Singh writes in Jinnah, where the chant was Om Shanti Ya Allah Va Guru. So it was an invocation to an eclectic God, which the anti-English sentiment actually enabled that the English realized that we have to divide this force and divide them into different gods all of a sudden. So here, this universal element, which is water, it doesn't matter who is coming here to have water, because it says Allahu, Khudawan Kareem, Ram, Vah Guru. So all of these are invocating invocations to an eclectic God, and the universal element is water here. At the same instant, I saw this from the Gurudwara, that the mosque and the Gurudwara are in close proximity, just like the photograph that I've used for my book, that they're in close proximity. In Train to Pakistan, he says that when the Muazzin would call to prayer, right after that, the Gurudwara caretaker will call to prayer. So there is this kind of a synchronization here. So these this is a dialogic trajectory. So a dialogic trajectory of symbols is present, images and characters, which externalize the social and cultural, political, eclectic reception of the event, which was partition, leading to a flexible terrain of dialogue spatially. Now, this is actually with specific reference to India-Pakistan partition, because we tend to look at partition from that angle only. But when I was presenting this paper in Japan, I thought people didn't even know that Indians and Pakistanis, or India and Pakistan, had separated. They thought some of them thought we had not separated. Some of them thought that we were still at war. So I thought to myself, how am I going to explain a paper here where they don't even know the difference between the two countries? So, but when I started off, they could relate to it, and it won an award because they said it was a very universal topic. There were so many who had undergone this kind of partition. You read Palestinian literature for that matter. Indonesians came up to me and said that we have the same issues with Philippine, and the Turkish came up to me and said we have the same issues with Greek. So the issue that who am I again arises, am I Turk or am I Greek? Am I Indonesian or am I Philippine? So am I from the subcontinent or am I Indian or am I Pakistani? All of these then issues come around. So partition then again is a very universal element. It's not just, you can't confine it to subcontinent in its essence. Then I looked at the langar that was there. Of course, the tradition goes from far back. So I saw, which I am willing to work on further, that dialogue, despite separation, separation, and relocation. There is a disparate ideology that hinges on the fulcrum, and it oscillates towards dialogue. What was important was, for me, that you could, despite this separation and relocation, you can retain dialogue, because it is a possibility. Langar system has shown that any person from any walk of life can sit here, of any ethnicity can come and sit here. So these are the possibilities that we have to actually focus on, rather than what the political agenda is or what the strategic agenda is. And these possibilities are there, that's why they're still nurtured. The word relocation to me became a very important aspect. I instead of displacement, because I teach diaspora literature also, and displacement is a very phenomenal word, because it's not about just moving to, say, UK or US that we think of as diaspora, but the Europeans, when they came to India, they were also part of the diaspora. They were also displaced. When we, of course, we moved across borders at the time of partition, we were also displaced. But if we continue to dwell on the word displacement, then we will carry the past in our way of life almost always. Then that concept of home will always remain very displaced, as opposed to relocation, where I see that I look to the future, where there's something progressive. So I'm now working on more ideas that can actually focus on relocation. So now that we have all relocated post-partition, let's move on. Because see, we have to see that the past always carries something for one person and the other for another. If you have one erased, that time would be the best time for you, but it will be the worst time for the person who has lost the race. It's the same event, but it will be seen differently. What is important is that we move forward from that event. And that's why, again, Bakhtin's way of looking forward is interesting, because he uses theories from physics and Einstein's theory of time and space, which he incorporates into his theory, so that we can actually be fluid between time and space. That too is an element of dialogue. So if we move forward, say, to another, this is actually quite a theoretical explanation of heteroglossia, chronotope, and polyphony. These are the terms that I have used. These are the concepts that I have used in my book. My book is divided into 4 chapters. I'll just quickly show you that first, then I think, yeah. So 4 chapters which focus on these 4 books. Initially, what I wanted was to show the event of partition from 4 different angles, knowing fully well that, of course, it's a novel. There will be multiple perspectives within there. So Bapsi Sidhwas, of course, was for a Parsi perspective, thinking that it was neutral. But we have to understand the Parsis were not participants of the event, but they were affectees of the event. So that element is pretty much prevalent there. And then I used Train to Pakistan, Khushwant Singh's In Clear Light of Day by Anita Desai, and Meher Nigar Masroor's novel, Shadows of Time. So I'll get back to that once I'm done with the. So I try to apply these concepts on the novels, because in order to understand dialogism, of course, we had to delve into the theory of it. So heteroglossia, as the term says, hetero, that means plural, a diversity of styles and voices. Within a single perspective, multiple perspective, you have coexistence of distinct varieties within a single language. Now, within myself also, I have many voices. Within myself, there is other voicedness, as well as the other voicedness outside. So the simplest way that I can explain heteroglossia is that if, for example, there is a garden and you have a bed of roses and you had a bed of marigold and you have a bed of pansies and a bed of sweet pea, they can all coexist and they can all flourish. No one bed of flowers or no one flower has to subsume the essence of the other. So someone rightly asked me, but then someone needs to maintain this garden, right? So I said, yes, the gardener. And in this case, the gardener is art and literature. Art and literature has the capacity to bear different types of flowers and yet retain their essence, not subsuming anyone's voice. So that was applied to one of the novels. And then chronotope, which is the intrinsic connectedness of temporal and spatial relationship, was applied to Anita Desai's novel. And polyphony, which is a derivative of musicology, and talks about unmerged perspectives and unmerged voices, was applied to Meher Negar Masroor's works. So I've already spoken of how monologic is different from dialogic. And I have used monologic discourse also in my book by using historical accounts, but I've tried to dialogize those as well by using different historical accounts, not just one. For example, if I'm working on the history, I'm also using Jaswant Singh's Jinnah, as well as Stanley Walport's way of looking at partition, as well as the Hind Pakistan history book, which is used in Pakistan. And so I tried to use as many references as possible to continue this dialogue even within histories. Now, this image is actually very important because I showed it again abroad to an audience that was not familiar with the differences of these buildings. We in the subcontinent are, of course, very, very much familiar as to what is what. But when I asked them to a neutral audience, they said, oh, they're the same because they have domes and they have minarets. They're the same. How are they different? So the dialogic space, which we have made dialectical, is actually the heteroglot world. It is differences which we have celebrated. And these are buildings per se, but we celebrate them for their differences. Instead of adding a dialectical or contestation to it, we should celebrate these differences. And so dialogism, again, multiplicity manifests itself as series of distinctions and categories appropriate to the perceiver on the one hand, and categories appropriate to whatever is being perceived on the other. Person object must be shaped in time and space, categories of the other, and this is possible only when the person or object is perceived from the outsidedness. Bakhtin, with respect to two people, one must make sense out of the existence each other shares with the other. The other is always perceived in terms that are specific socially and historically. So the other has to be brought into our frame of reference as well. So this is how I actually started my book. And then the first chapter was on Parsi narration. Now I looked at the fact that an 8-year-old Lenny is narrating the events of partition. And then I looked back that almost of my age, at least my generation, all of our parents were around this age when they gave accounts of partition. So an 8-year-old has a very terrestrial perspective, does not have an aerial perspective. So what I felt was that writing in the 1980s, Bapsi Sidhwa was relying on memory. And memory, of course, is very unreliable, and it is created. It is, as a creative writer, she also says that she is creating this whole thing, but so it is created upon, and whatever our parents said is added on to it, whatever the others are saying is added on to it, and we make it as our memory. So Lenny's memory is that. It is created. And in doing so, Bapsi Sidhwa, what she did was that she detracted the religious identity from the characters. They were all called by their professional names, like cook, gardener, Aya, ice candy man, so that we don't associate any religion with it. And that is why Lenny was unaware of any religious differences. So all the shared symbols of living together in a region, of being Punjabi, the Chaudhary saying that I will give my life for my Sikh brother, and the Sikh saying that I will give my life for the Muslim brother, they were all shared symbols. And all of a sudden, our symbols, religious symbols, which were very innocent, like the kirpan or the dagger or the sky, became religious arsenal. So shared symbols were then used, exploited for others' purpose. And that purpose has to be also brought about into the frame of reference. That's why I read British history about it as well. And if you've watched the movie House of Mountbatten, you see a different way of looking at 1947 partition from the British perspective, the BBC perspective, as opposed to many movies and films that were produced by directors from the subcontinent. And Aya in this book was somehow a metaphor for India. And as soon as you took away Aya, there was mayhem and chaos, and they killed the friends that were used to sit around Aya, then started killing each other. And the second book that I used was Khushwant Singh's Train to Pakistan. Now, this, for me, for others, some people thought that it was a very simple sort of a book, but for me, it was multifaceted. Because and that's why I used heteroglossia on this, because he gives voice to inanimate objects as well as animate objects. The train is in dialogue with the bridge. When the train comes, the bridge rattles. And when the train comes full of dead corpses, the bridge is quiet. Then he gives voice to unheard screams as well. Hukam Chand in this is a magistrate who steps into a train full of dead corpses, and there he opens his mouth to scream. Yet it is unheard, the scream. So Khushwant Singh has given a voice to this unheard scream. Then he begins the novel with children and women and cows and dogs playing and working in the same fields. And he ends his work with children and women and cows and dogs lying dead as corpses in the pond next to the village. So he has thus given voice to almost the corpses as well. This is the beauty of his work that I found. And he also raised a very valid question when he said India is constipated with a lot of humbug. Take religion. And then he continues to talk about what the Muslims are focusing on, or what the Hindus are focusing on, the Sikhs are focusing on. But then he says ethics, which is the kernel of all religious code, has been carefully removed. So he has portrayed a very important question here. The third chapter that I focused on was Anita Desai's Clear Light of Day and Chronotope, because it is a movement back and forth in time. The chapters move from past to present, present to past, and the spaces also changes. There's an altered space with moving time. The same Raja Sahab's house, which enjoyed grandeur, is now depleted. And so that is important. Like the image here is that of a langar. And then all of a sudden you see the image of dead corpses. So this is how it all changed. But again, Anita Desai's perspective is very different from Bapsi Sidhwa's perspective. There, Aya and her friends are standing at Shahalmi and feeling the fire. They can hear the screams. But in Anita Desai, she distances herself and she can see the flames of the fire somewhere, but not feel it. She cannot hear the screams, but imagines the screams. So her distance from the space where it is happening also determines her new perspective. And we must then incorporate that too. The fourth work was a Muslim writer, Meher Nigar Masroor's novel, Shadows of Time. And she begins her novel with Hindu Bengali characters, and her characters are widespread. They from all walks of life, from saints to magistrates to politicians to Air Force fighter plane pilots. She has used an array of characters to depict different podiums. What she's done is she's given the mic to almost all character, where Sarla is a Hindu character and her lover is Farhan, a Muslim character. And Sarla is very, very vocal about her political views, and so is Farhan. But both of them never subsume each other's voice. They allow each other to speak. That is the idea that comes out of this book, that we the polyphony, the unmerged voices that are very much there. Then she also quotes many Hindu saints as well as Muslim saints, and also Christian spirituality, where she speaks of Khwaja Farid, and she speaks of I am Mandir, I am Masjid, I am Magus temple, how these saints were the universal force and contributed to the shared symbol. So this was actually the whole crux of the idea that I was talking about, because India in itself, I feel, is a reservoir of shared symbols. It was and is. It has many, it carries within itself the Sufi thought as well as the Hindu thought, as well as the Parsi thought, and so many other thoughts within it. It has many hybrid races. It has plural religions and plural languages. Interestingly, we have cohabited the space for centuries. Okay, so it has actually been only a little more than half a century that we've been separated. So there are so many shared symbols that we still have within us. And these can be actually polished by art and literature. Like what Saadat Hasan Manto, one of the short story writers, he migrated from India. He said, do not say 200,000 Hindus have been slaughtered and 200,000 Muslims have been slaughtered. Say 400,000 humans have been slaughtered. The same idea which Tagore speaks of in Religion of Man, that look at the capital M in the man, not the small m, that connects us from the past man and to the future man. The cellular composition is the same. We are the same. So let's look at the human factor. This is what novels or art manages to do. My second book is Cultural Confessions in Khalid Hosseini's works. So for that, I did a lot of research and I looked through many blogs written by teenagers, because I feel teenagers are actually the future. So what are they thinking of Khalid Hosseini's work? These are teenagers from America. So what I read was interesting. Some of them wrote that before reading this novel, we thought Afghanistan was just rocky mountains with bearded beasts running around. But after reading the novel, somehow we can see children there, limping, handicapped, war-trodden topography, war as a trauma, not just something happening so far away. War doesn't necessarily have to have a name, that the Russian invasion or the Talibanization. War in itself is a trauma because it is inflicting pain on another human. I've used The Man He Killed by Thomas Hardy in my upcoming novel as a prologue, because I feel he writes that the man that I kill, I could very well be having coffee with him in a bar or beer with him in a bar. So that is the whole idea, humanizing the issue. And art and literature, when it humanizes the issue through utterances and anticipation of those utterances, through response and dialogue that we are at present also engaging in, is what we are going to then move forward to. And I will now end with a couple of things here, just this little slide here. A common divine being perpetuates actualization and divine entity. So mostly the point of contestation are the religious spaces. And this is what is written on the religious spaces. How can this be a point of contestation? On the Parsi Atishka, the Tower of Silence, it says, unequal in life, all lie equal in death. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. I'm sorry if I pronounced it wrong. The whole world is my country. The earth is one family. This is Sikhs borrowed this from Hindu eclecticism. I am Masjid, Mandir, and Magu's temple. This is Sufi thought. And Satya, Dharma, Prema, Shanti, Ahimsa, eternal values of Hinduism. So these are the eternal values of almost all religions. So the religious space that we use as point of contestation is actually a point of dialogue. So we must incorporate it in our perception. And I'll end this with a brilliant quote from Bakhtin, that perception can only be achieved from a unique point in the spectrum of possible perspectives. What we see is governed by how we see, and how we see is determined by from where we see. So we have to incorporate and move around into this panoramic image and gather all the perspectives possible. So any questions?
Thank you so much, ma'am. I'm just going to take questions from the chat section. I can see some of them. Okay, the first question is from Keshav Bansal. In Manto's Toba Take Sing, there seems an absence of dialogue and a repetitive rambling monologue that descends into madness. In light of the setting, the partition, would you agree that in absence of a reconciliation of self, the madness is made imminent? Also, what according to you made this break in communication happen? The partition, the loss of homeland, or the loss of self itself?
Okay, a very interesting question. This is one of my favorite short stories, actually, Toba Take Sing. What I feel is that sometimes we tend to, what is insane is actually the virtual world of sanity. What we see, the world of sanity, that is the insanity that we are engendering. What happened at the time of partition, when friends slaughtered friends, neighbors slaughtered neighbors, people we dined with, people we lived with, was insane, actually. So yes, what Mantu is trying to show is that somehow the sane in their monologic discourse also, there is a lot happening. He's talking the babbling that happens within the story actually has some meaning too. He's talking about some dal and boiling over of the dal, right? So there is, in the babbling also, you see that something has been brewing and it's just boiling over. So this conversation that he's having within himself is actually a dialogue with himself, with his sane self and his insane self. They're both having a dialogue. Like I said, the dialogue does not necessarily have to be with another human being. You can have that dialogue within yourself. And that is actually where, when you can become a mature person, when you can first have that dialogue with your multiple selves and then move on. So yes, the last part, what according to you made this break in communication happen, the partition, the loss of homeland or the loss of self itself. Again, the moment we cut off our past shared symbols and we use those symbols as an arsenal, because we were enticed to do so, because diversive now was divisive, that is when we lost a homeland. For some was a loss, but then again, like I said, whatever happened, now let's look at it as a relocation and find homes where we are in the vicinity of that.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Just to connect with this, I was just thinking about Avtabra's homing desire, because she says that when we displace or when we relocate from the home to the host country, we can't, because home is a mythic place, so we can't actually return there. It's just an imaginary land, but we can always relate to it. And to add to this, I would like to say that it reminds me of the third space that Bhabha talks of, that it's a middle ground where you can't discard or you can't amalgamate both, but at the same time you can keep some traces of that, reject some traces of that, and at the same time integrate into the new culture, so that it becomes a transitory phase. You don't have to lose anything, but at the same time, because Bhava says that at the same time, Rushdie also said that relocation and diaspora is not a loss, it's a gain, because you always gain something new while adding to the past that you carry with you. So
yes, what I feel is, in the state of diaspora, but actually, you know what, we think of diaspora as something that we're moving land from one land to another. For me, displacement can be from one home to another, from one room to the other also. It is all because the first book that I wrote, Sand in the Castle, a collection of short stories, so it's about home, the concept of home. Where are you at home, right? So you may be at home in confines of your home, but you may not be at home even in your home. There are moments when you're not. And some people have found themselves at home in prison cells also. So it really depends on how you see it. But with specific reference to people who have shifted from a country, you are neither here nor there, but at the same time, you are here and there. So the idea that you are carrying all of that within you is quite important, and that is a positive. So looking to moving from one place to another can be a positive as well. Yes. There's some question or something here. Yes, your approach of erasing borders and working for communal peace. It lands you among writers of postmodernist novelists, as it promotes faith and dialogue and communication. Do you agree? I'm not going to label myself as something in particular, but yes, I do look to the novel that I'm working on right now is about, it's called Maina. So it's a migratory bird, but I am looking to, I don't need to erase borders, because as humans, there are no borders per se. We are all humans. And like I just said, you know, technology has just shown you this global identity. There's a book coming out, which I'm editing the book, and it's called A Cartographic Journey of Race, Gender and Power, Global Identity. So my work is basically on the fact that now we've become a global identity more than if we confine ourselves to just the physical borders that we live in, because we look at us the way I'm teaching in America. I'm having this conversation with you here. I'm no different from any of you. You are not different from me. Somehow or the other, even when I'm teaching Chinese students, Japanese students, I feel that the connection between us is because we are now exposed to almost the same things. So there is a global identity out there. And we have used in that book texts which were not from this era, but from the past as well. So the idea of global identity is very much there because of the human chain that we belong to, the cellular composition that we have.
Yeah, this is actually what Masao Miyoshi also says, that the concept of transnationalism is how to transform the local into global identity. So it's the same what you explained.
Yeah. Yes, any questions?
Thank you, Dr. Haque. But before going into that, I have a question which is linked to the question you just responded to. How do you look at if there is a statement like postmodernist discourse, postmodernist texts are supposed to celebrate cacophony rather than polyphony? So can we call cacophonic text as heteroglossial? What would be your comment on that?
Okay, so yes, one thing I've also I worked on this actually was postmodernism, post-millennial authors and writers. Somehow or the other, if you look at them and you look at their endings and their work, you will find some form of closure and some form of looking towards an entity out there. So that also has kind of changed the face of postmodernism. The concept of decentralization is very much prevalent here when we talk about taking away the hierarchy from the voices that I'm speaking of, the multiple perspectives, and giving the podium and the mic to each and every voice. What you're doing is you're decentralizing. So that, of course, we can relate to when it comes to postmodernism. But I have always had reservations with stopping our course at postmodernism. That's why I look to postmodernism, which is actually a concept which the architects and physics and other disciplines have actually worked through. Their building structures are now called postmodern structures. So I looked to what those were, and that was to looking towards some form of closure. Like, for example, if you read Hunter Grass's work, The Crab Walk. Now he says, come to terms with whatever happened in the 1940s, move on. And he's now moving on towards a new way of looking at it. Some form of closure is present in his. I'm not saying there should not be a closed end, but some looking towards a form of closure is a good beginning, I would say. Khalid Hosseini also, post-millennial he wrote, and then he's an atheist, but all of a sudden when Sohrab is in the hospital, he throws the prayer mat and says, if you're out there, please listen to me too. So another way of finding some kind of looking for a center, but not actually finding the center. Is that
Amitava, you want to say something on this?
You know, there is
there is one question. So should I take the question first, or Amitava, you want to comment or say something on this?
Yes.
No, I'll continue the dialogue maybe after.
Okay, sure. So there's another question from Yasmina. She says, I really like the idea of accepting, cohabiting, and living with the other despite all the differences that literature and art in general advocates. But is this really feasible at the practical level in the face of capitalism and the desire to gain more political power and the persistence of wars and violence against other human beings, animals, and the environment?
So yes, this is a very good question, because the thing is that there is always an agenda behind political movements and strategic movements. You know that according to Foucault, that power is everywhere. So what happens is that you create a kind of knowledge which contributes to your power, and that knowledge creates the truth for you. So political powers are always going to create a kind of knowledge that creates a different kind of truth. Art and literature thus is ever so more important, because how long can you fight these wars? We've known also that we've tried fighting, but it doesn't work. You don't find solutions with wars. Yes, at the time they are indulging in it, but there has never been a solution that has come out of a war. So what we have to now look to is the humanities, the social sciences. Now, what you have science, which tells you what a machine does, but without the humanities, you cannot actually indulge in the human that you are. So I feel that, again, while let the political powers play whatever games and agendas they have, let them play whatever they like, but at the same time, let art and literature find its way, seep through, and initiate or retain the dialogue. That is the only way forward. Otherwise, what else are we looking towards? Mayhem, chaos, cacophony that you were mentioning, are we looking to just that? If we are to propagate, or if we are to continue as a human race, something has to contribute to that. And I feel that is where art and literature is important. Yes.
Any more questions or comments on this? Okay. Yeah. So the next question is, you spoke about dialogue transcending time and space. A good example of this is Amitava Ghosh's Shadow Lines. There is a shift of time and space repeatedly in the narrative. The protagonist or the narrator witnesses different partitions of countries, of families, of relationships, of ideas, and even selves.
Yes. So yeah, there you have it. It is there.
Shri, I think Charulika has raised hand.
Okay, yeah, sure. Please, Charu, please ask or say if you have some comments.
It seems her network is not working, so we can proceed if there is any other question. No.
Anyone who would like to ask in person or comment about something?
No.
I would want to add something.
Sure, sure.
I think such talks should continue as it promote and it gives an idea to listen to people across the border, because when we read the writings of coming from the other side of the continent, so we just meet the same people we live, we find ourselves here. So I think it is a very good initiative that you have promoted this dialogue activity, and it was very enlightening and promising for us. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Huma. And I think that in the future, maybe we can also organize something, and then we can invite you all and then have a dialogue per se. So this is, again, like I said, Zoom has made these possible. I'm also delivering a lecture in Afghanistan, which again was a problem earlier. Now it is easy to do so through Zoom. So yes, we should take advantage, full advantage of whatever is at hand.
So any further comments? Okay, so there's another question. Would you comment about the narrative in The Reluctant Fundamentalist, which is a remarkable monologue? The American makes no comment, yet we as readers are fully engaged in the conversation.
So again, the conversation, interesting thing about dialogism is that the author is also one of the voices only. He is not the center of attention. He's just one of the voices. And there is another voice out there, which is given to the reader. So the reader also contributes to this conversation. So far as, well, whether the American was not giving any comment, I think the gestures, and like I said, the unheard scream in Train to Pakistan is also a voice. The gestures and the expressions which he wrote about in The Reluctant Fundamentalist of the American are also very much there as a voice, as a perspective, as a perception. So I feel that the conversation that the book or the painting has with its audience or its reader is just as important in propagating dialogue.
There's Reemsha asking for some book suggestions. Maybe you can put it in the chat history, and then it will be a benefit for everyone to see the list of books or your suggestions regarding that.
Okay, so with reference to say history books, you can read, I like to read Stanley Wolpert's work as well. And I thoroughly enjoyed Jaswant Singh's Jinnah. That was very, very informative for me. And there are many books out there, which again, like I said, one book would not be sufficient. So you will have to look at, it depends on which kind of history you're looking towards. Train to Pakistan, again, would not be history per se, because it's a fictional town in itself. It's absolutely fictional. I've met Khushwant Singh, and he speaks of how his region is very important to him. So he's depicted a region per se, but not a town which exists in its actuality.
Any further discussion on this?
Sorry?
No, I was just asking the participants.
Yeah,
if they
I
would...
think there is no further question or suggestion. I'll comment. Yeah.
Okay, so should we? No, there's one. Globalization has destroyed the peace of current world. Could you please comment on this?
If you look at times when you've had wars all periods of time. So I wouldn't say that peace was ever prevalent in any of the centuries that humans have seen. So I don't think that peace in itself is something again that you can allocate to globalization or not, because even at a time when there was no globalization, people were not even aware of another land, continents and territories were invaded upon. However, yes, globalization does sort of, more than globalization, it is capitalism, which is the problem, right? So globalization can be looked at as part of capitalism or as part of unification of some kind of universalism that is present. So we can look at it from a positive perspective as well. If our children are speaking the same kind of accents, are reading the same kind of books, are watching the same kind of shows, and eating the same kind of food, we can see some positives in that too.
What would you think be an alternative for capitalism?
Okay, so as capitalism in itself also has many advantages. I feel creativity is one of the most important things that capitalism contributes to. Otherwise, you would be delving into mass-produced products of the same kind, nothing new coming out, nothing. So you wouldn't be investing in something which is different, unique. So in that context, I feel capitalism, yes, does contribute to creativity as well. But as such, these are all evolving concepts. Democracy in itself is problematic too. So all of these concepts of governance, of economics, they are evolving. And let's see where they sit, because anything that gets out of hand, any concept, is problematic. So there should be some way of controlling things, but I still feel that the more you control something, it comes out a little bit more. So creativity is actually, I think, part and parcel of capitalism.
Thank you so much. So if there's no further question or comments, I would like to ask Amitava to take the floor from here. Oh, there's another question. Sorry.
A few questions.
Yeah. To a previously asked question, if you are looking for a history of the Indian freedom movement, I would suggest Bipin Chandra and India's struggle for independence. Another good one is Sumit Sarkar's Modern India that explores intricacies of grassroots movements and social history. It's a good suggestion. So yeah, definitely. So Amitabh, please take from here.
Yeah, thank you, Shri. Dr. Syrrina, thanks a lot. You know, what you have added to Daily Comparatists discussion platform is that we have been working on issues which we are looking at multiple realities, but mostly because our audience was from India, and also speakers who didn't talk about India. Of course, they are when they talked about digital humanities, etc. That was a different thing. But yes, we really didn't have a speaker who has this much of knowledge and understanding and will include in the discourse from Afghanistan or Pakistan. When you were referring to partition as a Bengali, and that too from eastern part of Bengal, I could connect a lot. I will, before I'll like to make a few comments which came in my mind when you were talking. Okay, before that, I'll say one thing. As I said that this was happening, so I was thinking of proposing a panel on in the CLI conference this year on the appropriation of Perso-Arabic tradition in the construction of nationality in post-independence states in the subcontinent. So I wanted someone to work on, I thought of, apart from looking at the theoretical aspect, to look into the government-sponsored institutions' publications on knowledge tradition. So I got two scholars who are interested to contribute on Indian Sahitya Academy and Indian Institute of Advanced Studies. I have been searching for someone who can work on the publications from academies from Pakistan and also Bangladesh, but I could not find one. I really believe that if we don't get into a dialogue, which is not quote unquote friendship dialogue, where that becomes an agenda, which is an excellent agenda, but also we need to go beyond that, because the moment we meet only on platforms where there is a friendship dialogue, that begins from the crisis and somehow I think continues there, looms over the whole thing. Whereas on academic platforms, when we have someone talking about art and dialogism in art and literature and comments on with the knowledge of Pakistan and Bengal, and there are Indian audience and audience from other places, is really very helpful. So I am seeing in your lecture and also the questions that came up, a possibility of really building up that dialogue. So Shri, I'll request you to post the Daily Comparatist Facebook link here, and I'll request all the participants that whoever wants to join that platform, please join.
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to do that.
Yeah. So Syrrina, can I call you Syrrina?
Okay. Yes, of course.
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, when you were talking about this, who am I was reminded of, okay, you talked of all literary texts which we all know and belong to the high culture. I was remembering of Harry Potter. I think that's a very interesting example of the search for identity and who am I. Anyway, I liked how you actually noted down those sounds, silences as components of a dialogic relationship. This is very interesting and important. How, and particularly that discussion on the train and the bridge, when it rattles and when it doesn't, that shows that the author had that intention to make it a dialogic component. I like that. While you were showing those shared spaces of mosque and Gurudwara, I'd like to add another example which I really like to celebrate. That is Belur Math, which is from the Ramakrishna movement, and Vivekananda established that. The architecture of Belur Math is an excellent example of putting on the same shrine, putting elements from Islamic, Christian, Buddhist traditions, along with Hindu traditions from various parts of India. So this is another example. I was also, I was reminded of a few texts, so I'd like to share, like Guru Granth Sahib. It has, apart from Sikh Gurus,
Yes.
it has Sufis, Bhakts. So, yeah. So it has, I was just looking because when you were saying, I just was looking and I noted down that there were Bhakts, there were Gurus. Apart from Gurus, there were Muslims, there were, because, you know, Bhakts mostly came from Hindu background. So Bhakts, all of them become part of that, of a single text. And it is not a monolingual text. The script is same, but the texts are in at least 6 languages. And that includes Sanskrit and Persian, which was very important given the context in which the text was composed. So I think this can be a very interesting example. I was also reminded of Akbar's search for a state policy where he could accommodate a lot of various religious practices and put together. And I love that part particularly, when though he proclaimed Dini Ilahi, that was perhaps the only sort of religious sect which permitted one to remain Hindu but adopt Dini Ilahi, remain Muslim but adopt Dini Ilahi. Now, each religion has a singularity. But when we get examples like Guru Granth Sahib or Akbar's Dini Ilahi, these talk of multiplicity in a particular way, which of course is an exemplification how dialogue could really be heteroglossic in its expression. So those were things which I was reminded of. Of course, one thing is there when we were talking about postmodernism. I'm not so sure about this. It's true that cacophony is the aesthetics of postmodernism. But the context that binds it perhaps is the heteroglossial or polyphonic space that a reader gets or a viewer of the postmodern architecture gets. So, I'm sorry. So the point is that what I found was that in your lecture, it was so engaging and it brought in so many ideas and comparisons. It's really a very relevant and also scholarly understanding, which really helped us. And also the way you put examples from various disciplines, architecture, religion, etc. So once again, I'm really thankful to you. I'm sure that it will be rewarding for us if we also get you sometime later also, and you talk about your new work. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
So thank you so much, Dr. Amitava. And I'm so glad that you mentioned Akbar and Guru Granth, the book, Guru Granth. actually, I have mentioned it in my book. There, Akbar's Deen-e-Ilahi, and how the religion was a synthesizing force, and how it was different from dialogism a little bit because it asked for synthesis. And the difference between synthesis would be, it's quite interesting that if, for example, you put a teaspoonful of honey and milk, milk will remain milk, it will just be sweet. But in dialogism, when he says celebrate the incommensurable or the differences, he's talking about, if you've heard of the word food khichdi, potluck, that each and every grain of rice and dal, it retains its essence, its difference, its individuality. So this is what dialogue is. I'm glad you brought that up, because this is, and the whole concept of Sikhism is also was a dialogue between Muslims and Hindus, basically. So whatever Kabir's writings and Muslim inscriptions in Sikhism were quite relevant. And this proves that this is how we managed to coexist for centuries, because we had these influences, and it was an inherent quality between us that we could retain, but we didn't retain. But now it is possible also because of the globalization that we can probably proceed. And thank you so much for your kind words. And I would love to, yes, engage with you whenever it's possible. I will also like to invite you as well. So thank you so much, Shrimoyee, to go through all this trouble of organizing it and coming up with this idea. I was intrigued by it completely. Thank you. All of you, all the participants who have asked questions, who've been part of this. I'm honored. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, man. It's really our pleasure that we could engage in this dialogue. And obviously, thank you, Amitava, and all the participants who have been here to support us, to ask questions, suggestions. Thank you. Thanks to everyone.
Okay. All right. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.